I found, by the way, so one of my coworkers is really into Halloween and stuff, but really into like makeup, special effects, stuff like that. She's done a lot of like zombie stuff.
Ooh.
And she is currently working on doing the clicker just on her own.
Oh, wow.
She's really good. She's trying to get noticed, but
I saw some really cool methods for that. I saw someone using styrene, but then using one of those, they're like a hot bar that's curled and it's just cut through the styrene. I saw some people making flower petals and I'm like, the creative nature of this stuff is crazy.
Yeah.
I wish I had the brain to do that full time.
Oh, that's the dream. Could you imagine if you had like some form of echolocation? Because that's what the clickers have, right?
Yeah, it's basically it's like a kind of like a bat thing.
Yeah. Okay. Here's your opening right here. I got this one for you. You have echolocation. You have that ability. What do you do with it? What do you do with it?
I pictured what you'd be doing with it.
Obviously, you know me too well.
See,
you
like
caught me. I was trying to trip you up into it. I was trying to trip you up, make you look bad.
Nope.
But you caught me. Don't overthink it.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
No, but I guess, would also.
I've been a little scared of this topic because I don't want to get this one wrong.
Yes.
This one's close to my heart.
Well,
I don't want to ruin it.
Yeah. This one, I'd say this is definitely how Resident Evil is for me. I would say this is more so for you then.
Yeah, to a large extent. This is, of my 20s life, I would say the most important gaming experience that I've had.
Yeah.
I did really enjoy Death Stranding, though, but I definitely think this one sits higher.
Yeah. I still haven't played Death Stranding, but yes, I would definitely. I do enjoy, especially Naughty Dog.
Yes,
as a production company for video game development company.
They have a short but very notable resume. Uncharted, Jak and Daxter, and this. I mean, just each of the three of those are very, very solid. And
don't forget they started out, or at least that I remember, with Crash Bandicoot.
That's right.
Don't sell him short.
True.
Those games still hold up.
The remasters that they did on them are pretty tight too. I mean, they were. Yeah. That was a tough one because I mean that's one that like everybody would criticize if they got it wrong fixing them up. But yeah, they did a great job.
No, I remember they took. There's also, speaking of documentaries, it's about how one of the original developers for that game, right when video games sort of started to make that jump to 3D, how they figured out how they can use the original PlayStation to its fullest extent. When a lot of other companies at the time were barely scratching the surface of what back then a 3D console could do.
Yeah. Well, this kind of was a milestone for that as well. I mean, this came along right at the forefront of console technology as they were about to make a jump into a much deeper level of graphics. I mean, they were riding the line of what the memory of a console at the time of 2013 when this was released. I mean, they were really riding the line of what was too much in one game memory wise.
No, and we are talking about The Last of Us today.
Yeah, just to clear that up, we were talking the 2013 original release of The Last of Us, which has now in the decade since this came out, I mean, this has been remastered twice, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's one of I think that might be it's got to be definitely hold the record for the shortest time span of original
so. I can't
remaster,
think of another one.
And then now Last of Us, it's called Part 1.
Yeah, I think the biggest reason that they did the second round remaster was, number one, the first remaster, they remastered it from the PS3 to the PS4, and it sold like crazy. It was one of the highest selling games on the PlayStation 4, which wasn't even its release console. I think to just print that money, they just wanted to put it on PS5 because they knew it was going to sell a ton. But what I also think that they did, because coinciding with the release of the show, I think that they saw an opportunity to update the character designs slightly to kind of merge them. Because I noticed with that update to it, they looked a little bit more like Pedro Pascal, and the cast, the general cast, they made the character models look a little bit more like the actors portraying them in the show.
Yeah.
Which I thought was an interesting choice. I mean, that's kind of clever. I mean, it merges it, makes it a little bit more familiar to people who are coming into the game because of the TV show.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Well, so take me through, because I remember seeing Last of Us back on the PS3. It was toward the tail end of the PS3, I think.
Yeah, it was one of the last big titles that they had.
Yeah, it was sort of the swan song for the PS3, which is kind of interesting how it's extended into the PS5. So 3 generations of consoles now.
Yeah.
I remember seeing it and hearing about it, but how did you come to be enraptured by The Last of Us?
I knew a bunch of people who played it, and as we've discussed on the show before, I was not a PlayStation kid growing up.
Yeah.
I bought into the PS4 because I had heard about PT and I wanted to get on the Silent Hills trend. So I was very hungry for a great horror title when I got the PS4, but obviously that didn't pan out. So unfortunate to Hideo and his endeavors. That's why I got on to Death Stranding when it came out. I was really hungry for his creative style, and I wanted to see what he was going to do after that ultimately didn't come to fruition. But that not being here or there, I was still very hungry for a title and of the horror genre, and I was looking at this game kind of from the sidelines, and it looked very interesting, and I saw a couple of playthroughs, and the more I watched the playthroughs, I started shutting them off. I was like, nope, I'm picking this up.
Yeah.
And I tend to buy games later in their life cycle so I can pick them up a little cheaper.
Same here. Yeah, I always do, unless it's one that I'm married to. Like,
yes.
I've just
I can count on one hand how many like day one adopt titles I think I've bought. Two of which were Zelda.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, so you have your ones that you're gonna get the moment they come out, like Last of Us.
Yeah,
you were doing that. You were waiting for the deal.
Yeah, once I realized like what this game was, I immediately dropped all like those playthrough videos and watching all the Twitch streams and stuff. I was like, I'm not spoiling this one for myself. I want to actually experience it. So I jumped on, I grabbed a copy of it, immediately jumped in and started playing with it. And it just so happened to, I mean, it was like a bit of a double, like the story itself is pretty phenomenal, but it was the time for me personally that this particular story came out. It hit a very deep chord with me at that particular time in my life. And so me personally, it might just be like a me thing. I know a lot of people have had similar experiences with it, but for me personally, it was the time in my life that it came around that was particular to this story and the nature of how desolate this world was and the nature of these two characters that it resonated so deeply with me personally. But I mean, it was everything down to the design, even just the graphic design, like the marketing of the title. Everybody's seen that high stacked The Last of Us title that's very emulative of Johnny Cash. And that goes down through to Gustavo Santaolalla's score, which is incredibly well done. I mean, the music in this game is the emotional core that like guides you through. The gameplay and everything else is layered on top of it.
Oh yeah, I mean that music. And sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I'll add in there real quick. Like that's one thing I think in media and art in general, or at least visual movies, video games, I feel like soundtracks and music have taken a back seat.
Yeah.
And we grew up in a time when I feel like that was always a huge thing, was what was the theme to the movie or to the game. If I really enjoyed it, I always found myself humming the song or the theme afterwards. And this is definitely one that I think harkens back to that, having music that is not only good, but also challenges and adds to the story and the playthrough, rather than just being like background, like wallow, or like an air conditioner, like elevator music.
And it sticks with you too. And I think it's largely the style of it, just the nature of which Gustavo performed a lot of this music himself with his own hands. And he managed to do things like make a banjo sound like a broken grandfather clock. And just the nature of that fits this world in such a unique way of like this is shattered reality. Everything is kind of scattered on the floor, as it were. And you have that mental image of like daylight streaming through a broken window into this just broken reality. And it paints a picture in not just light and gameplay, but also sonically through emotion, just in the music that's played to you. And I mean, it's just like it hits on each one of those chords. And it is a unique story in and of itself. I mean, just the nature of a zombie story is not new, but what this did was it kind of took a look at how would that realistically play out. It just so happened, much like Dark, this kind of just through pure coincidence came along at a time that it was tackling a topic relating specifically to the COVID-19 pandemic. This just happened to come along in a period of time before that happened and was gaining notoriety, but then at the time that the second game comes out, it's literally just around the corner that oh, we're dealing with something that is similar ground that this is tackling, and it made it 10 times scarier.
Well, didn't part 2 come out right during the first summer? Like,
yeah, it actually came out the day before my birthday on June 19th, 2019, I think it was. So, I mean, they had extensive groundwork laid with the first game coming out, and the nature of that story with it is a dual protagonist game as it's often been described. I mean, it's essentially Joel's story, but as much as it's Joel's story in the first game, it is also Ellie's story, but she is at that point a much younger character. She's not quite as capable of defending herself, while she proves to be well above the curve for her age, being a survivalist in this very harsh world. I mean, she still is dependent on Joel, and they act as a dual team who rightfully two people in this world should not be able to survive the journey that they're on, but they do in spite of all the drastic, harsh realities that they are faced with.
Yeah, and just to like sort of set the scene real quick for those who have never played it, we're not going to get too heavily into the spoilers, or will we? That's your call. I don't know.
Well, I would say
how deep you want to go with the overall.
At least from this point forward, if you have not played the game, you may have seen the show, but there are extended details in the game that don't exist in the show. So I would recommend going and playing the game, coming back and check us out later if that's the case for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I, while we're on that topic too, what I found most interesting, a lot of people assumed I was going to dislike the show because it's not going to be the same as the game. But what I found most interesting was something I didn't expect from the show, is that it didn't really try and capture the game. It does a decent enough job at capturing the story of the game, but what it mostly tries to do is be what I would describe as a tangential experience, something that's giving you more beyond the borderline of the story of the game. Because the game is a very personal story between Joel and Ellie, whereas the show tries to give you the global scope of what is going on with this situation, which I found interesting because you're getting a lot more story out of the show while you don't get quite as much from the core experience from the game. The game still exists and you can go back and experience that. And I'm like, this is a much smarter take.
Yeah. No, I think that's what they were definitely going for. I think you put it perfectly, like a tangential experience to the game rather than being something to surpass it. Or I think this goes back to one of our earlier discussions. I think we talked about it during the Resident Evil one.
Yeah.
Oh, we have to make a game so we can make a movie out of it. As if the art form of video games isn't legitimate. Like a delegitimization of that art form.
But what's tough about video games, and I think that this is a very valid point, is that not everybody can play a video game. There are people who have certain visual spatial issues that they get headaches when they try, or they just don't have that motor skill to do it. It's just not their thing. It's not a pleasant experience for them. They need a TV show or a movie to experience a story like this. That's why I'm glad that exists, because it makes it accessible for someone who might not be able to play the game.
People have never played the game. Oh no, that's all a fair point. My is more coming from that I still believe that video games are an art form in their own right.
Oh, absolutely.
Their own form of storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have you and I talked about just Zelda, Last of Us, Resident Evil alone? Beyond that, there's a million more.
And speaking of tangential, there's one little video that I always enjoy, and I think this comes from part 2. Can you in part 2 play the guitar? There's like a moment where as Ellie you can play the guitar or something.
Yes, there is, and it's one of my favorite parts of that game.
I guess someone plays the Uncharted theme in the game. So I don't know. I always like that.
There's also another really fun tie-in to Uncharted. So in the first game, Ellie's red t-shirt.
Yes.
The design on that shirt is on the Wave Runner from Uncharted.
Oh, is it? Okay.
There's a couple little fun tie-ins like that. Definitely some Naughty Dog crossover.
No, yeah,
fun.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah, because there were a lot of the creative team that ferried over. Like they were obviously Naughty Dog as a small studio, so they've ferried people over. But I mean, usually like when a project ends, some people will take a hiatus and not jump on to the next thing, so they'll bring in new people. But in this case, a lot of the same people came over to Last of Us from Uncharted, and I thought that's cool.
No, yeah, I mean, you can. I noticed because I didn't really fully play it until you recommended playing it again, and I played the remastered version, and I can definitely see the foundation of the gameplay that came over from Uncharted in it.
Yeah, there's a noticeable connection in like the mechanics and the gameplay. It's not identical, but there's some similarities that you're like, okay, this is a Naughty Dog game. But the voice cast too that they pulled in, I think part of what makes this such a good game was it was treated as a dramatic narrative.
Yeah.
And it shows in the casting that they picked and the way that they treated these scenes like shooting a film in a lot of ways. Ashley Johnson killed it as Ellie. I mean, it is certainly not a knock to the TV show, but I mean, she is Ellie. And for the fact that she's, at the time that they made the game, she was almost twice the age of the character. I mean, it was what she was able to pull off with her emotions and her voice alone. I mean, she's a phenomenal voice actress. If you've heard her on Critical Role, it's a group of voice actors that get together and do D&D campaigns, and they all just have way too much damn fun with it. But I mean, you can really see their voice acting chops whenever they do, because they really bring the characters of their campaigns to life. It's crazy.
Well, and I lost my train of thought there. What was I about?
No, you're good.
Oh no, did they mocap the original game? Don't they?
It wasn't as quite as tightly sophisticated as some things are done now, like with the tight facial expressions. But I mean, they did the mocap suits, and they didn't grab all the facial details like they normally would nowadays.
No, they know. Okay,
but
I mean, the actors, the voice
still
actors,
acted out all those scenes. Yeah, they like treated it like a film set. It was like, I remember I was listening to a lot of BTS stuff, but Troy Baker, who plays Joel, and he does, oh my God, he does such a beautiful job. And again, it's kind of the inverse of that. I mean, he's much younger than Joel is. And the fact that he's able to make his voice sound so bold, play that part with a level of wisdom well beyond his years, is just kind of awe-inspiring to look at. And
and I would agree. Same thing with how you mentioned Ashley Johnson for Ellie.
Yeah,
I'd say same thing with Troy Baker for Joel. Like, and not to knock the performances in the show. And
no, I think Pedro does a great job. I think
everyone
it's a different
does.
Take on the character.
Yeah, it's a different take for me though, and maybe it's just because the game was first. I
don't think, because of the nature of which Ashley Johnson is older than Ellie. I mean, she couldn't physically play a young Ellie right now. And just the same as Troy Baker is not like, he could probably pull off an older version of Joel, but he's not physically buff enough for me to buy it. You know, he just doesn't look the part, and that's no knock to him. I mean, he is Joel in the game, like 1,000%. Like, and then too, what I thought also was really cool was Nolan North is in the game, and he plays one of the most terrifying characters in the game.
Who does he play the?
Forgive me, I do have to look that one up.
Does he play the cannibal leader?
David,
yeah.
Nolan North, who plays David. I mean, he's a ferry over from Uncharted. He plays Nathan Drake.
Wow, I never knew that was him. That is kudos to him for playing that. I never.
If you watch the making of documentary, they cover that pretty in depth, and you can watch him jump into character. For like, his normal voice sounds a lot like Nathan Drake. But like, watching him snap from his normal voice into David is crazy. And he said that they didn't really even take time to develop it. He said he just kind of had that one in the back pocket waiting to use it at some point.
That's amazing how much sometimes too when a character is just ready made, like they just exist. And
that's what I love about voice actors, is I think that they just spend a lot of time playing in the mirror. And like they have a few that they're just tinkering with, waiting to use at some point. And I love stuff like that. But yeah, like the three of them, like I said, watching that documentary, I do recommend that. It's on PlayStation's main YouTube page. It's also available on the Last of Us game. I'm not sure if it's on the remasters, but I know that it is on the core game, accessible, that you can watch it from there once you beat the game. But it's called Grounded. Very good documentary. Covers in depth the process of developing the game. Very, very cool stuff.
Which is, I think, significant, because there aren't many documentaries out there that I can think of beyond this one that cover how to create not just a game, but a narrative game like this from beginning to end.
Definitely not at length like this one does. I mean, I've seen some BTS stuff of certain games, but not like to the depth and length.
Yeah. I've seen some of those featurettes or small little snippets that give you a little bit of behind, but don't really give you the meat and potatoes that this does.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Death Stranding had a good bit, especially on their music, which the music for Death Stranding is fascinating. But again, neither. I did want to talk about the design, but first, since we were still on performances, I remember hearing a bunch of people talk about how Druckmann was like he's Neil Druckmann, who was the creative director on the first and second Last of Us games. He was co-director on the first, but he reigns fully for the second. He directed most of the scenes, from what I recall, and they said that he was very willing to just kind of roll with things and change things on the day as they were quote unquote performing the
yeah.
scenes
For the game,
for mocap.
which I would imagine would be incredible for an actor. I don't know. I mean, maybe not. I never.
Well, I
acted,
know that
but
there
just,
was some difficulty. Troy Baker had a lot of tough times trying to shoot the. Now, this is a very big spoiler moment. Just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to breathe and jump ship if you need to. But
no, we already said it.
Yeah,
Go
but
ahead.
this is one I'm going to give an extra layer of protection on.
All right.
In the earliest part of the first game, Joel's daughter is killed, and it's a very difficult scene performance-wise, and Troy Baker was very happy that they got it quickly initially, but then they had to go back and quote-unquote reshoot it. And through the reshoot process, he had a long, difficult time. They couldn't get it, and it was just a lot of tinkering and very tedious emotional work, and
yeah.
Just they couldn't nail it, and he was going back and forth on it and trying to figure it out, and he just got so weary with it, and it was tough work. I mean, I give them a lot of credit for the depth that they went into on an acting level with this. I mean, it shows in the gameplay. I mean, it
definitely does, and it makes me think of. And I've heard that you being a Kubrick fan, it reminds me of, I don't know if this is true, but it reminds me of the famous scene in the end where, forgive me, the actress's name in The Shining.
Shelley Duvall.
Yes, thank you. Is being confronted by Jack Nicholson. Now he's gone like full crazy. And she's walking up the stairs backwards. He's following her. She has the bat and she's like, stay away. And she's so exhausted. I've always heard that they did so many takes on that. I don't know if that's true or not, but and I've heard that she got so exhausted, and it shows in the take that they finally used.
Yeah.
So that once again, you saying how they did that with Last of Us for that scene, you can definitely see hear the weariness, the just exhaustion, the shock in Troy Baker's performance.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I do think it was one of the later takes that they used because they said they went through so many. Like you said, you can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, moving forward, I mean, into the design of the game, the decaying civilization, I think, was one of the things I initially remembered most when I first got out of playing it.
Same.
Like, just that environment and those worlds. I mean, especially the skyscraper from the third or fourth mission, where every movement is on a slant because the building you're traversing is half knocked over.
Yeah.
And I remember just being so jarred by the visuals of that and just the immense level of design. And everything came from the notion of nature retaking human civilization. There was something about that would just struck such a deep chord and was like, oh, we are not as important as we think we are.
No, yeah. And you think about it, and I'm pretty sure, I know they've probably done a lot of their research, or as much as they could do to tell this story. That is, I believe, fairly accurate, that if you just all of a sudden if we just snapped away, and we're just gone, humanity, then it wouldn't be that long for nature to retake the cities, become
about half the time of the huge time jump of 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And also, what I thought was super interesting about that time jump was in the world of the game, the year in which the cordyceps virus strikes is in 2003. 10 years following that equates to the release of the game.
Yeah.
Then 10 years following that equates to the release of the TV show. And I thought that there was something interesting and felt very structured and planned about all that.
Yeah. Which I'm like, well, could it have been? Could they have done that? Could they have foresaw?
Part of me wants to think that was very strategic.
Yeah. No, that is certainly. And cordyceps, which is a real fungus that affects insects, particularly ants.
Yeah. That's what I thought was the most terrifying thing of this entire thing.
No, yeah. I think there's actually different.
Possible.
Yeah, no, there are different ones that affect different insects, but it's like nature. Nature's way of controlling a population.
Yeah, the only real barrier to it is, I think, like a 10-degree separation or so, that the fungus just doesn't operate at our level.
Well, that was an interesting scene. And real quick to talk about the show, I did like. I'm curious your thoughts. I did like that opening scene.
So did I. I thought that was 60s. Very creative.
I did really enjoy that. How they shot it, just a quick one-off.
Well, also because I thought that they picked very smart material that wouldn't have fit as well in the game, because the game is meant to be this very, like, it's almost like the desolation and all of the story wrapped around the cordyceps virus in the game is very much just a backdrop to this very human story between these two people.
I'm sorry. I have to interrupt you here. It's a fungus. Okay?
Fungus Among Us.
Get it right. We're trying to be professional here. No.
Yeah.
But no, it is. Okay.
No, it is. Yeah. I mean, it's often referred to in the show as a virus, which is
as the virus, yeah.
But yes, you're right. It is a fungus, which is interesting. It's an interesting way to go about it because I mean it's all scientifically possible.
Well, I thought that was a good way to, like you said, it is because anyone who's not familiar with it, they could look at it and be like, oh, it's just another zombie type scenario.
Yeah.
Sure. But once again, here's a way to take something that has been done and reinterpret it and inject some new life into it.
And give it a different spin.
Yeah, and just sometimes it's just as simple as, okay, yeah, instead of it being a virus, we're going to make it be a fungus. And that changes how it operates.
It gives new rules and a new landscape to work with.
Yeah, exactly. And the different enemies you're going to see and what they're going to look like. Just doing one of those things, doing one thing differently and doing it well. I think we've mentioned this before. When you're telling a story, can really go a long way rather than trying to come up with a whole new recipe for bread right off the get-go.
Yeah.
If you just, maybe if I'm making some soda bread, instead of using raisins, I'm going to use chocolate chips this time through. We always come back to food analogies. I don't know why.
Hey, if it works, man. Speaking of food, they did do this year at HHN, they did Last of Us as one of the houses, but they also They also had some catering tailored specifically for The Last of Us, and I have to say it was my favorite food of this year's HHN by far.
What'd they have?
They had, for a dessert, they had what they called a ration bar, and it was interesting because it was kind of like a really clever, like fudgy Rice Krispie type deal, but I'm not doing it justice by describing it that way. And it was
almost like a power bar type
kind of like a really well done power bar.
Or like you ever had
they were like
perfect
cooked,
bars?
Like they were baked fresh.
Oh
too.
yeah, you ever had perfect bars before?
No, I have not.
Oh, those are good. I highly recommend them.
Yeah, I'll have to check those out. But they did. I actually have here. I saved it from the event. They gave us a little ravioli can, and it's got a label on it that says Fedra food ration. They had an alcoholic coffee there, and it was by far my favorite drink of the event, save for maybe the Stranger Things fruit punch deal. But yeah, that's the areas that they had. They decked it all out, made it look like an area of the game, and it was just like I was like, I'm living out a moment here.
So it was almost euphoric.
It was just like it was kind of like a grown up boyhood come to life experience. It was. I didn't really know what to do with myself because it was the care and detail that was put into it was like you could tell somebody cared to do this right.
No, that's good.
Since we're talking about it too, I might as well just talk about the house itself. It was just absolutely phenomenal. I do want to give I've said this a couple times in this episode so far, but I do want to say if you do plan on going to HHN this year and want to go through this house, I want to give you the opportunity to opt out and get a fresh experience on that. But going forward here, let's talk about the HHN house from this year down in Florida. They did an absolutely phenomenal job. They did the Pittsburgh level, and you walk into the house, right around the first corner, you see the crash truck, and the actors are coming at you with like the human weapons from the level of the game. Mm-hmm. And as you round the first few corners, walking through the building scape there, they did a lot of projection effects of like shadow play, and they used it very cleverly in this particular house with Joel and Ellie showing up and putting on their masks, and they did a soap effect where they dropped fake spores into the actual set of the house, and where they displayed spores, it like felt like you were in the game, and it was pretty magical.
Wow. Okay.
And yeah, there's just all kinds of great little details. They had 2 bloaters through the course of the map you were walking through, a ton of clickers. That's just they would pop up and just absolutely scare the shit out of you. Yeah, I cannot commend, because I know Neil Druckmann worked directly with Universal to bring that house to life. They just did an absolutely phenomenal job. Us being from Pittsburgh drove it home that much more.
I mean, that was probably the one disappointment in the show.
I can't even say how much I was upset.
They moved the sequence to Kansas City instead.
Which, to be fair, I get why they did that production.
I guess it was just a production thing, but
I get it. But
but
No.
still, I'm not going to sit here and say I wasn't.
Yeah,
hurt.
I'm not gonna bash it. That's their prerogative. They're making. But as a resident of Pittsburgh, that was also part of my love of the game was the fact that they went to the place I've lived my whole life. And not only that, but it is the most brutal and harsh area of the game.
And
I was like, oh, and seeing these places that I go to on a fairly regular basis in this
I have to
big
say,
production game.
And how they did it in the game too. They got some of the layout and geography of the area and the city pretty good, especially the bridge, which I think is I'm trying to remember which bridge.
It's Fort Duquesne.
Is it Fort Duquesne Bridge? Okay, I couldn't remember if it was Fort Duquesne or Fort Pitt.
Yeah,
that you're going to.
Yeah, it's Fort Duquesne, and I admit that the geography isn't completely accurate, but
it's not 100%, but still,
for what you
especially
see
for when
the
it first came out.
Like it honestly, it works just well enough to be fully passable unless you really get in there and nitty gritty pick at it.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean that goes back to like the design. I mean the flooding of Pittsburgh and all that, and I just the harsh reality of the people there. I mean it's well thought out. Like it's like that's definitely I could see everything that they did working, and it also just like the nature of going from city to city. I think was very smart because it has this unifying effect to everybody playing the game who lives in one of those cities. You see it, you're like, oh, I live there. It's like it's not just Pittsburgh. I mean, it's multiple cities along this journey to getting through to meeting up with the Fireflies that they're on track with. I mean, and that's part of what I thought was so cool about this game was it has this unifying effect in a harsh landscape, which is very much where we're at. Like, I just thought that was cool. But yeah, that design, that decaying landscape, the plant life reclaiming as well as the zoo life. I mean, that scene with Ellie and Giraffe.
Yeah, I was waiting to bring that up. That is a masterpiece of a scene especially in a video game. There is
I'm sure you and I have talked about it before, but the combined reference there, right?
With the giraffe?
There's a two-pronged reference there. Number one, they're both to Jurassic Park. Number one, it's the brachiosaur in a tree scene that they're going after.
Okay.
But also the fact that Ellie's name is Ellie. She was named after Dr. Ellie Sapp.
Oh, see, okay. I never knew those were definitive. Like those are definitely nods.
I've only heard it stated in like the most subtle of ways. By Druckmann and the team, but I really do think that that's the end.
Okay. Oh yeah,
It makes. Let me put it this way: it makes too much sense for it not to be true.
It does. And as we know, if it makes sense, then it must be true.
Exactly. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't care about anything else. It makes sense to me. Therefore, it's
my reality.
It's my. Oh gosh, that is the way of the world at the moment.
Yeah. But going through the development of the game, the ambient lighting that they did was way ahead of its time. Like on a PS3 architecture, it was the amount of darks that it was such a balancing act for lighting because like they wanted it to be all natural light because there are no artificial sources other than flashlights in this world. So it was a bit of a tricky act, but they actually didn't include a flashlight up until later builds of the game. And it was one of I don't want to say a last minute addition, but it was late into the process that they started talking about adding that. And the flashlight looks so good. I think it's one of the most shining aspects of the game. It's because the light pattern of the flashlight makes those environments look so realistic. It's one of those kind of things you kind of have to play it to see it and understand, but it looks so insanely good, and it sells that world so much more if they had not.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, having that contrast, like you need like.
It's like you can see the actual like aura of the bulb as it would be like reflecting. Like that level of detail is insane for a PS3 game. Like it still kind of blows me away.
No, yeah, and how even now playing it, on a PS5 or I believe you can get it on PC as well too. I think, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean now the lighting has only gotten better. But that is definitely, I think some people, like, this is something we learned that I always found interesting. And, like, I think would have been our second year of film school is when you're shooting a dark film or when you want to make it dark, you would think, oh, just no light. But it's actually the opposite, right? Like, you actually need more light to make the shadows and you can always bring
it down. So it is a balancing act across all aspects, but it's tricky. There's not really a right answer there other than you got to get in there and play and find what's going to work.
Yeah. I always just found that interesting.
Considering like the parameters that you're working with are always usually pretty specific to the story you're telling.
Yeah.
So it's
And
it's
in-
never like one thing.
And for Last of Us, lighting is definitely a huge one. This isn't something where
yes.
you would want to use the what we would call high key
No, yeah.
lighting, where you have that low contrast, which you see more in like comedies or
Part of what
romances.
was so
more
tricky, I think,
you know,
about it was that because they were forced into using natural light, they had to build the environments in such a way that were conducive to the lighting. And I think that's part of what made it so tricky, was because then you're now dealing with multiple aspects of development towards multiple goals. So it became very across the board. Especially Naughty Dog is not a crazy big juggernaut studio. I mean, they are now, but they weren't at the time of making this. They were still very new. And then also goes to the building of the environments, goes towards the puzzles. What I thought was very interesting about this game specifically, and I know Uncharted did some level of this, but not quite to the same degree. The puzzles, there were multiple ways to solve. Basically, just navigating each area to get from like point A to point B. It's like, oh, you could go retrieve this ladder and climb up, or you could go up the staircase, which is shattered, and then shimmy up the wall and climb up that way. So it's like there's not always one answer for how to solve a puzzle, but it's like all roads lead to point B, but it's like how you get there that's unique. And it's like it does feel like you're crafting your own way through this maze each time.
Yeah, I've always thought, like, you hear the thing in more well-known forms of storytelling, show don't tell. And in video games, I feel like that you almost need to come up with a different rule. Obviously, you can't just tell and you can't just show, because there needs to be that interaction with the player. I mean, it is a game at the end of the day. There has to be that some sort of gameplay. And
that's what's most interesting there to that point. Like, I think from the drama aspect of this, they found very creative inroads towards making the gameplay experience only enhance the drama. And what I thought was unique was I heard Druckmann talk a couple of times on this and said, with me just a second.
I was trying to do a clicker. It wasn't very good.
I can't do it either. I've tried multiple times. I can't get
it. Terrible.
Why can't I find this point? I know I wrote it down. There it is. Yeah, I remember hearing Druckmann speak on this, and he said one of their main points towards trying to make the game experience only enhanced by the drama was that they wanted to exploit mechanics in a narrative sense. So, like, I think a good example of this is towards the end of the game when they're coming up on the area of the giraffe.
Yeah.
You have to do what you've done like 1,000 times through the course of the game and boost Ellie up so she can pull the ladder down.
Yeah.
And you go to do this, and there's a beat, and you see that Ellie is distraught and she's not paying attention. And it delivers this very great character moment through a game mechanic where, like, you as a player are expecting this thing to happen, but then you're thrust into the storytelling of the game through that. And I thought that was so unique to this experience. I hadn't seen another game do anything like this. And
definitely.
I could tell when I was playing it, I was like, this is going to change the landscape of how games are made.
No, I would agree. And I think that definitely bridges the gap between the game design and the narrative, the game mechanics and the story itself. And this brings up, I think, a point that Naughty Dog, I don't know if Naughty Dog coined it or came up with it, maybe, but the ludonarrative dissonance.
I've heard this a number of times. Yeah.
Yes.
You've mentioned this especially.
Yes. And we'll have to dedicate an episode to it. But essentially, in a nutshell, it's there's always like a disconnect when it comes to games with the mechanics of the gameplay, how you, the player, are going to go through the game, or how you as the developer are going to have the player go through the game, and then the narrative, the story. There doesn't seem to always be that connection between the two. When you're doing art, you have that all different parts relating to create a whole picture. And for the longest time, most games didn't have that. And I would say, yes, what you're talking about there, making sure that the game mechanics feed back into the narrative, and the narrative
it's not just happening in
feeds back into it. Yeah, exactly.
So you're not just watching a movie happen in a game engine.
Yeah, it's how
taking
you
up an active role.
Yeah, because storytelling in and of itself is a passive experience for the most part. So how do you take something that's interactive and integrate the story that it doesn't feel tacked on or just sort of slapped on top of it.
I can't tell you how many games are just like get from point A to point B, and then the story happens in between those.
Yeah. And two, like a lot of that was out of,
and then the story
yeah,
happens.
and a lot of that was out of like, it almost was like a sort of, well, just sort of like an extra little thing to keep it going,
yeah,
to keep the player interested. Just sort of like, oh, we have extra time here in terms of making the game. Let's throw in a story just to spice it up.
Yeah.
And I think as
you could
video
feel
games,
it.
has evolved now, depending on what the game is, but a game like this, people have come to expect a more mature, more in-depth, more attention given to the narrative as well as the game. There's still plenty of games out there that don't need an in-depth narrative to it. You can kind of have it do one way or the other. But one thing too that I love about this game is it uses the landscape, the world, and I think you mentioned this just a little bit ago. It uses notes left behind from you, like if you go and explore and you pick stuff up, it uses that to sort of flesh out the world. If you want to know more, you can read like diaries from people who used to live in a house.
Naughty Dog's style in general. Naughty Dog did this with Uncharted to a large extent too, with collectibles in that game series. But what I found interesting was one of the main collectibles through both Last of Us games are letters. And as you collect them, you can go back to them and read them at any time. And this is where I got into it and really took my time with The Last of Us, was because I would hunt down these collectibles and I wanted to get as much of the story out of it as I could find. So I took a very, very long amount of time to complete the game the first time, because I was trying to hunt down and get every possible collectible, because I wanted to get the maximum amount of story impact, because I wanted to know, like, because once I discovered especially Bill's story that exists behind that curtain, I was like, oh, wait, there's a lot more here.
There's a lot more going on there, yeah.
So once I found out, the more you dig into all that stuff, the more crazy depth you find in this storyline of stuff that you just like didn't expect. And sometimes it's as simple as like, oh, just like this area was this person's house, and this is why, what happened to them. But sometimes it has, like, especially in Bill's case, I mean, it has a long-standing impact that actually resulted in them changing his storyline to reflect that more deeply in the TV show, devoting almost an entire episode to it. So I thought that was very interesting. But yeah, I mean, collectibles in a lot of games are important, but I think that they took it to another level with Last.
No, yeah, the collectibles can sometimes always feel like an afterthought.
Yeah,
something that you just kind of add on later, not necessarily integral to the game. This is definitely
of the game.
One of the, if I was to point to someone who would always say, well, games can't truly be art because blah, 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 there's too much disconnect. This would be one of the first ones I would point to say, I feel like everything is there for a reason because the creators wanted it to be.
Yeah, I would agree. I forgot to mention when we were talking about Gustavo Santaolalla in the score, I remember watching a breakdown of his studio. I mean, like, even just to re-mention too, going through and watching them produce the score for this. I mean, he used weird stuff like PVC pipes at different lengths.
Now?
He would play them like a didgeridoo. Like,
what in the hell?
And there's all kinds of stuff throughout the score where it's just like weird instruments like that. I mean, he would do like twang boxes and stuff for just like a simple, like one note, and then he would layer it on another note. So it's like the amount of depth that's in an otherwise seemingly fairly simple score. There's a lot going on in this score.
I wouldn't even know where to find PVC pipe in the store, let alone how to write a score with it.
Yeah, I remember looking at his personal desk setup. It's like he had a rack sitting there of just like a dozen or so PVC pipe at like different lengths for different purposes, different widths and stuff. Like, this dude's a nut. And the other thing is too, what I find interesting about him as a composer, he doesn't like to write out music so much. He'll obviously have a written sample to have on record, but I mean, he likes to perform and experiment his scores into existence. And I kind of love that. I certainly don't pretend to be any kind of professional, but I've gotten into score level producing music in the past few years, and I really respect that level of just like experimentation and trying to find it in just the performance of it, more so than just sitting down and trying to write it out in your head and then have it performed.
No, and again, like I mentioned earlier, the soundtrack, you definitely hear the soundtrack in this, the score. rather
too,
than
like
it
what's
being
weird about his studio
just sort
is
of background noise.
Yeah, I also noticed that in their studio they have recording hookups in every room of their studio, including the kitchen and including the bathroom. And I thought that was very, very interesting.
Just in case, you never know.
I'm just trying to picture someone with like a bass guitar sitting on the toilet, strumming it out. But he did say that they got some very interesting recordings from them just sitting around having lunch and then just deciding to plug in and get it. And I thought that's very cool. Like there's something interesting about that. Kind of funny, but at the same time, it's like, okay, I can see the practicality of that as well.
No, and this is, I gotta say, I did really love, because I think one of the reasons I didn't really give this a shot in the very beginning when it first came out is when I saw it, I was like, oh, this just looked like a Children of Men story, sort of. Which, I don't know why that wouldn't have pulled me in, because I love that movie.
It honestly does sit in a similar category to a lot of degrees. Like, obviously, it's a different story, but at the same time, it's like there's some
different story, but it has that similarity, that structure.
Yeah.
And do we want to get into one of like arguably the second big twist? So you got the big twist in the beginning.
Yes.
Which we talked about with Joel losing his daughter right out the way. And the way the game starts is you are playing it from the daughter's perspective, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, from the opening sequence, yeah.
Yeah, you're controlling her. So that was I gotta say, that was a bold move to...
The changeover in that sequence is the car crash.
Yeah.
If my memory serves, because that's when she becomes
Yes. And then you're playing as Joel. You they blended it so well that you kind of don't even sometimes realize that it happened. At least I didn't the first time, because I was engrossed in it. But do we want to talk about a little bit the ending, or do we want to?
Yeah, I could jazz on the ending.
Because I actually thought that was another one too, that I was like, wow, okay. Because it really hits heavily with the theme of what they're trying to go with here. You have this just broken world. You have these essentially broken characters when we first meet them.
One of the most interesting things I've heard on the subject of Joel as a character was that he is a man who has few moral lines left to cross.
Yeah.
And I think that describes him to a T.
Yeah. No, I'd say well said, perfectly said about him. And one of the things you learn early on with Ellie is that she is, as far as we know, one of the only person in the world who is immune to the cordyceps fungus.
Yeah.
It has no effect on her. And
she has some degree of understanding of how important that is, but it is the linchpin of human survival.
Yeah. And just to set the scene, the final showdown is the whole story is getting her to the Firefly lab is it Colorado?
Yes, I believe
the lab is that. Is it Colorado or is it Utah, or it's out west? Definitely, they're east in Boston.
Actually, I think you're right. I think it's they go to the university in Colorado, but I think that the last scene is in Utah.
Yeah. And then they got to get the lab out west. And keep in mind, you can't just hop on a plane anymore. The world has pretty much disappeared in the past 20 years since the fungus outbreak.
It's all on horseback, or it's all on foot.
Or pretty much. And when they finally do arrive, Joel makes the discovery, or the revelation is hit upon him, that in order for the Fireflies to make a vaccine, if you will, from Ellie to then administer to the world, or what's left of humanity.
Yeah.
They have to, I essentially think they had to like harvest her brain, or they got to kill her.
They would have
to learn.
Yeah, they would have to harvest such a level of brain tissue in order to
that it would kill her.
And get bone marrow and a number of other things.
Yeah, so they basically need to carve her up in order to get what they need. And I've always found that interesting, because Joel makes the decision to just say, nope, that's not what's happening. He says, screw.
I think that it's the lie after the fact. I mean, yes, the heroism of defending her is a morally ambiguous choice. But then on top of that, he chooses to not only protect her physically, but to try and protect her emotions of what he's done choosing on her behalf.
Yeah, he doubles down on
and that has implications that carry into the plot line of the second game.
Yeah.
I won't go into that now. But, it's a much more long-standing impact.
I definitely thought that was an interesting way to end the first game because in his mind, I mean,
And it's almost like both in the show's performance of it and the game's performance of that ending scene, literally the last shot that you see, you can tell almost that Ellie knows that he's lying, but is forcing herself
to believe it.
To believe that.
Or not to believe that, yes.
Which I found interesting. And also to the same point of that ending sequence, the other big point I thought of that there's every story has three. So I think that the other second point that's most interesting is the period of the game in which Ellie is taking up an active role of saving Joel from when he becomes impaled. And I think my only other real criticism of the show versus the game was the big element of the game is the crafting element, keeping your arsenal and your weapons up to snuff as much as humanly possible because you rely on them all and every bullet is going to count, the amount of inventory that you have, all that wraps around that. But what I found interesting about my game versus show experience, I guess I'll put it, was the lack of the bow struck me kind of hard, and for a very specific story reason. And it comes down to that area of the game in which Ellie is defending Joel and trying to nurse him back to health. She takes up an active role in hunting the deer, which she was not, as a survivalist, capable of before. And she had to craft her own bow in order to do that. And it showed a level of skill and character development for her that was very interesting. And when the show chose not to use a bow, that's one thing that kind of struck me on a story and character level that, I don't want to say I was disappointed with because I get why they did it in the show, but it did feel like I got more out of the game, I'll say, on that front.
Okay.
But I thought that was a very interesting story point because you can see Ellie becoming more of a survivalist. She's getting to a point where she's more capable of surviving on her own in this world, and you're seeing her develop as a character beyond Joel needing to protect her. And that also, I think, has a compounding effect to Joel's effort to protect her at the end of the game. So I think that there's some themes that are at play there that are clash with one another in a very interesting.
Yeah. No, it is definitely, we talked last week about when I said masterpiece for Exorcist. I have to say this is a masterpiece too. Whether you have your things against what a game should be, that's fine. But I still believe that this is in the pantheon of a master class.
And I would even consider like the show and this as one unified experience. I think that the two go hand in hand.
Yeah, definitely.
So as like one singular story told across multiple mediums and iterations, I think it is one of the most important big stories of recent years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And even just real quick too, like the amount of I just always love the creativity of the different levels of the enemies that you face, the way the cordyceps affects the person, the infected.
And also that it's not even just those infected with the cordyceps, pardon me, those infected with the cordyceps fungus that you are impacted by. It's also the people of this world that have been pushed to the absolute brink.
Yeah.
I mean, you're fighting a war on multiple fronts.
Yeah. And I think that's what influences Joel's decision at the end to save Ellie, because in his mind, it wasn't the fungus or the infected that took his biological daughter from him in the beginning. It was a man with a gun. It was a human. It was a soldier that did it. And in his mind, it's like, oh, we're going to do it again. And he can't. Nope. You don't get to do it again. And he's just like, whether you consider it a selfish choice on his part, I think that's up to you, is what you can hate him or love him for the decision he makes, especially even like lying to Ellie thereafter.
And I would like to get into it another time, but the DLC missions from the Left Behind series, which they incorporated into its own episode in the TV show, which I thought, but I would like to cover those but I mean, the amount of it has the best expansion I've ever seen in a DLC and the most justified DLC I've ever seen in a game. Yeah. I didn't feel like I was just being raked over the financial coal. Yeah, the few bucks that I spent on that were so worth it because it just adds such a beautiful level of detail to the existing game.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can play the game, absolutely. And if you can't, or you just won't ever pick up a video game controller.
The show is a great substitute.
The show is a great substitute. Yes.
Yes. Substitute is the wrong word. It is a great tangential experience to the game, but it also does deliver enough of that base storyline that if gaming is not your thing, you can still get
an alternate,
get the
but substitute in the sense of like, well, if I can't get an alternative take choice for you, if just video games are just not a thing at all for you, but
there just is so much material in this game that there was no way it was ever going to be covered unless the show went on for 15 seasons. Yeah, just there's a lot of story material in this game, so to pack it into 9 episodes, I think that they did one hell of a job.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, phenomenal job. Definitely worth checking out. I don't want to go with you.
I don't want to go with you. Get out of here. No, I'll go.
I'll just go. Just stay away from me.
No, I actually already am going, but I got tickets on a day that you're not available.
Yes, I've planned this. I've planned this out completely.
Oh.